Thanks for joining us. My name is Nick Frontino. I'm the Managing Director of the Economy League of Greater Philadelphia. Appreciate you taking time to join this important discussion today. We are hoping to shine a light on what's happening to Philadelphia's food economy in this time of crisis. There's a lot going on, as we see in the news and on the media, and it's hard to keep up. We know that food-related workers and businesses are on the front lines of impact, and that they're a huge part of the Philadelphia economy and a major source of employment and income for our communities here. So we're going to spend our time today going through some statistics on the size and scope of Philadelphia's food economy that we at the Economy League have produced over the course of the past several months, in addition to some analysis that we've looked at on the potential long-term impact of COVID-19 on the food economy. And in addition to those high-level statistics, we're going to hear from some experts in the field. Now, we've had more than 100 people register for this event, so we do want to get a sense of who all is here. So everyone should have answered a question when you entered the meeting. We're crunching those results. We know that we have perspectives from folks who work in the food economy, who are food-related business owners, who are just plain foodies, and who work in food-related policy and economic development and workforce development. So I'm just kicking us off here. The way we'll spend our time is we're first going to hear from Mahona Sadiq, a project manager at the Economy League, who is the lead author on a report that we produced in partnership with the City of Philadelphia's Department of Health last year called Good Eats, that took a look at the size and scope of business activity and employment, food-related business activity and employment in the City of Philadelphia. She'll present on some summary statistics there, and then we'll hear from Mike Shields, a project manager at the Economy League, who's been looking at the ripple effects of COVID on the local food economy, in addition to other sectors and other impacts around Philadelphia. And then we're going to have a conversation with three industry veterans about their experience on the ground, where the biggest pain points are, and where they need the most help. So our panelists today are Jeff Brown, who is a fourth-generation grocer and owner of Brown Superstores. Maria Campbell, who's a longtime restaurant industry veteran and founder of Cooks Who Care, an organization that's focused on the health and well-being of restaurant industry workers. And Kim Carter, who's the vice president of partnerships for the Enterprise Center and oversees their Center for Culinary Enterprises. So we're using Zoom's webinar feature, so you're only going to see and hear the folks who are presenting today. If you have questions, or when you have questions, I should say, please enter them via the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be monitoring that, and our moderators will do their best to get your questions in front of our panelists. And I do want to let everyone know, give everyone fair notice, that we're going to be recording this session, and we're going to make it available on economyleague.org afterwards, so that you can review and share. So with that, I think we'll get started. I'm going to pass it on to Mahona Sadiq, project manager at the Economy League. Mahona?
Thanks, Nick. Good afternoon or morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, as Nick said, my name is Mahona. I manage the Economy League's civic consulting arm. And I'm one of the authors on a report that was published at the end of last year. You might have seen some stats from it. The report is called Good Eats. And like Nick said, it was an assessment of Philadelphia's food economy and a collaboration between the Economy League and Get Healthy Philly, which is out of the city's health department. So we have a fantastic lineup for you. Slide, please, Mike. But before we begin, like Mike said, as Nick said, we are using the webinar feature, but just in case, if you're able to mute your computer, that would be great. Use the Q&A feature, and sort of above all, as you put your questions in, make sure to be respectful of the moderators, of the panelists. So let's just give you a taste of what we have lined up for you today. My colleague Mike Shields and myself are going to draw from our research to provide some framing and context for the real meat of this conversation, which is the perspective of our esteemed panelists. So we're excited to defer to their expertise. We have some questions prepared for them, but there will be an opportunity for Q&A. So again, make sure to use that feature on your computer. So to provide some framing, what exactly do we mean when we talk about the food economy? And what we mean is the food economy is all jobs, all firms, all economic activity that's associated with these 6 sectors. So food production, where your food is grown or produced, food processing, where that food is then taken from its raw form and processed into something that we can eat. Then distribution, how it moves from place to place, so from farm to table or from wholesale to restaurants. Food retail, so where you go and you buy your groceries, whether it's at a big firm or at a small bodega around the corner. Hospitality, where you, whether it's the caterers or the restaurants that we frequent. And once we're all done eating, the waste and recovery. So this is what we mean when we talk about the food economy, all of the activity that's associated with these 6 sectors. So one of the things that we learned from this report that we did with Get Healthy Philly is that food is so central to Philadelphia's economy overall. 12% of all jobs in Philadelphia are food related. That's a huge number, and that's 79,000 food related jobs. And businesses are really incredibly important as well. 18% of all businesses in Philadelphia are food related. So when we put raw numbers on it, Philly really is, it's a foodie town. Next slide. We know something about those businesses as well, and that is that most of them are small businesses, which is really interesting. So above 86% of all the food related businesses in Philadelphia have less than 20 employees. Kim here is going to give us some really interesting perspective on that small business frame. We also know that the food economy is really central to wage tax revenue for the city. In 2016, it contributed $66.3 million in wage tax revenue. That's a huge number. It represents about 4% of the city's overall wage tax revenue. So we've done, over the course of the last few weeks, some really great analysis through leading indicators. And my colleague, Mike Shields, is going to talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has really disrupted some of this extensive economic activity. So I'm going to bump it over to you, Mike.
Great. Thanks, Mahona. So like Mahona said, what we learned in our leading indicators briefs, which are listed on our website on a weekly basis, we previously did a leading indicator looking at the impact of this pandemic on the food economy. And what we learned is that the food economy is still adapting to the changes brought on by this COVID-19 pandemic. And I say that because it was only 4 weeks ago, although it seems like years at this point, that both the mayor and the governor mandated the closure of what were, non-essential or non-life sustaining businesses. Now, for much of the food economy, food is obviously essential. So a large portion of the businesses and occupations within the food economy remained open. But panic shopping and new demands for non-perishable items and cleaning supplies really altered regular supply chains. So while most of these businesses and occupations remained open and unchanged, they really had to adapt to what were now changing demands and changing supply lines due to sort of panic shopping. So the production, processing, and distribution sectors really had to meet new demands and start shuffling through with new products. And waste and recovery had also to start thinking about adapting to accommodate for not only their worker safety, but the public safety as well and how they dispose. But on the front lines of this were the food, hospitality, and retail sectors. So if you see, we kind of marked out the sectors that stayed open and then the sectors that stayed open, but with some stipulations. And those stipulations have a large impact on the local economy. So as many of you know, while some like grocery stores and corner stores, those who supply food in retail sort of remained open, they really had to bump up staff and really think about ways to make sure that they were getting the products to everyone who was sort of panic buying on the onset here. And they have to still think about how are they going to keep the flow of products happening to make sure that they can meet the demand. On the other side of that are the restaurants and the various food hospitality businesses and occupations who, while they were allowed to remain open, they were sort of mandated that they could not have customers come in. There were no gatherings allowed in these businesses, which if you think about that for restaurants, for fast food joints, for any sort of these smaller hospitality firms, that is the main source of their profit margins, the main source of their business. So this really had an impact on these restaurants and these smaller hospitality firms and the larger hospitality firms as well. Oops. So from what we know from our Good Eats report that Mahona conducted, we know that hospitality and retail really dominate the other sectors in terms of employment in the food economy. So you can see here the green portion of the circle here is hospitality and the yellow is retail. We're talking about over 75% of the jobs here in Philadelphia's food economy are in these two sectors. And as of 2018, that's 73,000 jobs in the city are within these two sectors of the food economy. And these jobs are your servers, your cooks, your bartenders, your shelf stockers, your barbacks, your baristas. And with social distancing and mandated closures, these food business owners had to cut labor as an expense to stay afloat. With non-physical ordering, you know, online takeout and curbside takeout, you don't need all of your staff to take care of all of those orders. So a lot of owners, through no fault of their own, had to start cutting expenses, and labor was one of the first things they cut, since labor usually constitutes about like 25 to 35% of all expenses in food hospitality. On the flip side, however, we have to remember that the majority of these jobs that were being cut see lower than average wages in the city. In fact, we calculated that in food hospitality and retail, the average annual wage is about $25,000 to $30,000 lower than the city's average annual wage. So this is major implications, considering this is a large number of employees and that they were sort of had low wages to begin with here, and now they're being cut. So it sort of limits it. This has the potential really to sort of grow the city's unemployment population, but also limit that population's capacity to pivot to a new career, since most of the jobs that they would seek are now closed off to them. So what we did for our leading indicators data brief covering the food economy, we decided to estimate what would sort of direct and indirect job loss be from if these industries started losing employment and started to contract. Now, I'm only going to focus on what the direct job loss would be right now, but if you're interested in also seeing how this indirectly affects other industries and other sectors, I encourage you to go onto our website to take a full read of the data brief. So we first started with a conservative estimate of a 10% industry contraction. So that means that if 10% of both of these sectors lost 10% of their current employment, and we're talking here, the result is 7,000 jobs lost and a loss of $3.6 million of wage tax revenue for the city. And to put this into perspective, if you think about the Great Recession, just in the onset from 2008 to 2009, the city lost approximately 11,000 jobs in total across all industries, across all sectors. So this loss from just food, hospitality, and retail, you're talking about 63% of the total loss we experienced during that sort of the major year of the Great Recession. We then did sort of an estimate of what lines up more with what some local experts are predicting for this field, and sort of a third of the industry contraction, or more than a third of the industry contraction. So we're talking about 25,000 direct jobs lost in these two sectors, and $12.5 billion of wage tax revenue lost for the city. So for perspective on that, we're all aware of the city's recent job growth. In fact, we've been sort of substantially adding jobs in the city since 2012 up to this past year of 2019. And we've added 58,000 jobs, you know, a sum of 58,000 jobs in total. So we're talking about the loss of 25,000 jobs. That would be 43% of all the jobs that we gained since 2012 in the matter of a few months being lost. And we also know that, listen, this is what we're seeing as the worst case scenario right now, but the longer that the pandemic lasts, the longer that these economic mandates last, the worse these scenarios are going to become. We know that the majority of food businesses are small businesses, and our most recent leading indicators, in fact, really kind of talked in about how the pandemic is disproportionately affecting small businesses. And we know that small food businesses are already working in tight profit margins even before the pandemic happened. So we're really talking about a major effect in an industry that's very big in Philadelphia. So where do we go from here? I know that I didn't mean to scare you with all statistics and some estimations here. And I realize that many of you who joined us today are in this industry and trying to navigate through this time of uncertainty. So the main objective of today is really to talk about what's happening both quantitatively and qualitatively to Philadelphia's food economy. But we also want to start talking about solutions. So our mission at the Economy League is really to provide research to bring together local leaders and hammer out solutions to the region's problems. So at this point, I want to pivot over to the panel discussion. We want to hear from our local experts about what they're seeing from their positions in the city's food economy, and then we can really start discussing what are the possible solutions or resources out here so that we can navigate through this time. So with that, let me quickly introduce the panel one more time. First, we have Maria Campbell, who is the founder and creative director of Cooks Who Care, a community-minded, solution-focused network of forward-thinking food and beverage leaders with the goal of improving the cultural norms within the food industry. Jeff Brown, who is president and CEO of Brown Superstores, which ranks in the top 50 of all US small grocery chains. Jeff is a fourth-generation Philadelphian grocer who opened his first store in 2004. And in fact, many of Jeff's stores are located in what were traditionally underserved neighborhoods without access to fresh fruits, vegetables, and other foods. And last but not least, we have Kim Carter, who's the Vice President of Partnerships at the Enterprise Center, a local CDFI with a rich history of providing capital, business acceleration plans, and community and economic development opportunities for minority entrepreneurs and under-resourced communities across the city. And Kim is also the champion of the Enterprise Center's Center for Culinary Enterprises, which is a state-of-the-art culinary center that supports both established and startup food businesses and food processors with commercial kitchen space and any sort of assistance they need to start their businesses. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen real quick, and we'll jump into the panel discussion if our panelists want to unmute themselves. So I think the best place to start here is with Maria. We've been talking about employment. We've been talking about the work of the hospitality workers and sort of what's happening to them right now within the food economy. And really, I would love to hear, from your organization and from your perspective of being in this field, what's happening on the ground with food hospitality workers?
So we serve two entities, which is the employers, so they could be small business owners, and then their employees at the same time. So we field answers to questions on both of those sides. Maybe they're a leader that wants to support their team and they're trying to navigate all the new legislation. What are their options for financing? And then we have employees trying to navigate, savings and how can they limit their expenses and what kind of unemployment options are available to them. We had a lot of wellness requests as well for being home, because a lot of them are not used to being home and not having anything to do, and they spend 90% of their lives at work. So I find that we're getting a lot of feedback from individuals who just feel lost, no sense of purpose. How do I still commit my energy to being a fruitful, thriving individual in a community that they dedicated their lives to? So we're seeing a lot of responses on what do I do personally to develop new habits for myself that are healthy and maintain a good quality of life, and then others just seeking financial support in any way possible due to all the limitations.
And Maria, this is Mohona. What do you think additionally needs to happen to help workers navigate the crisis, sort of ideal scenario?
Well, I would say what I want to see for the future of all of this is just more collaboration. I've never seen so much collaboration happen ever between each organization that's happened, because it's all about pooling your resources. And because we have to do cross-sector communication, like, what do you have that I can share with our community? Because we're all serving the same group of people. You may have something that you work on policy, for example, and lobbying, with some different issues. Well, let's share those resources with our community, because that's not something that we do. So for Cooks Who Care, what we've seen is that we've performed this conduit activity to go, let's refer resources so that people finding X number of things have a solution. And I would like to see beyond this more, maybe a project restaurant restoration, where we have some sort of community of individuals all across the sectors trying to work on lasting change for vulnerable populations, because I've seen such a need for our strength in numbers to share all of our resources.
Yeah, and do you think that this will be sort of a long-term cultural shift? Is that sort of the sense that you're getting?
100%. I think that, I don't know another word for pivot. It's just everything is pivoting. Your business, your life, your work, every single aspect of our lives. There's no better time than to just start fresh and to think about new foundations that build us stronger, because we can see how fragile and how vulnerable our community is. And with these added pressures, it just knocked out, floors for us to stand on. So I think we all see the holes, and we have an opportunity to improve those systems to care for workers, and how we serve our customers. 7 days a week may not be long-term success plans, which we've seen, burnout increases, et cetera. And now we're being exposed to the frailness that we've created because of how we want to serve our customers. So now that I feel that the greater population sees beyond the celebrity chef and how they think it's an elaborate, job, they're now seeing like how anybody who is serving a customer has a newfounded respect. I mean, even for, Jeff and grocery workers, like, people have a new level of respect for service long-term. And I think that will also help improve the new foundations we create.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all incredibly good points. And I mean, for the benefit of the audience, are there really innovative solutions or collaborations that you can point to that you've seen so far that folks should know about?
I've loved the collaboration that's been happening so far. I mean, even right now, we've created a Google document that has consolidated and grown. It's live. It's just really taken every single organization that we've communicated with since March 12th is when we created this document. We've grown from 8 categories to 19 categories that share information from fact sheets, webinars. There have been 32 webinars on topics specifically for the food and beverage industry from all across the board, from restaurantowner.com, kitchen table consultants. We've had my benefit advisor, On Point Nutrition, local fitness people, just really working together as one entity to share information. We've personally collaborated with James Beard Foundation, which also shared our resource list. Like, everyone's creating their own list of resources to help people, including platforms. I know we were talking about radio earlier, like even podcasts like Restaurant Unstoppable. The Food Policy Advisory Commission was actually doing a collaboration between all of the different organizations, and ROC, PRLA. Like, this is why I think that our organizations really need to rally together in order to provide support for each other. And just continue to find those resources with people that you trust and just cross-share.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And for those of you who are in the audience, obviously we're at the Economy League are really interested in solutions. We want to make sure that you guys are connected to these resources that Maria is referencing. In addition to sharing our slides, we will make sure in those slides that some of the resources that our panelists mention, that information gets to you. So thank you, Maria. It's really incredible perspective. Appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Well, I think since we sort of started talking about what's going on in terms of retail now, Jeff, I think we should pivot over to you. So what do you think are the biggest issues that food business owners are facing right now, particularly someone, you know, this might be the flip side of what's happening to the hospitality workers, where you're seeing a larger demand happening in your stores?
Yes, so that's true. I mean, if you think about it, in food today in America, about half the food in dollars was previously served by the restaurant industry, and half was served by retail. And the restaurant industry is not able to sell what they used to because they can't serve customers like they used to.
Right.
And so that is a shift, but it comes with a lot of complications. And I guess that this challenge we have, this crisis, has 3 phases of it. And the first phase was sort of panic buying or hoarding. And so it wasn't that we didn't have enough, it was that people were really buying excessive quantities. And we were trying to manage that through limits and other techniques. And we really are beyond that phase now and going into a really tough phase of a lot of disruption, either due to people being sick or people too afraid to work because they think they're going to get sick.
Right.
And so it's really affected the warehousing and logistics space more than us, where we're seeing, and manufacturing. So we're seeing a lot of plants closing because they had cases of COVID, and at not at good times. And retail, I guess, is easier to clean than a manufacturing facility. So where we might be closed overnight to get the place cleaned up and sterilized, it seems like some of them are closing, you know, for a month to address their issues. And then in the warehousing, it seems to be that it's much more difficult to prevent the spread in a warehouse environment. And we're seeing warehousing and logistics have a greater amount of spread of COVID and a huge loss of their personnel, which is really disrupting our ability to get the food from the manufacturers to the retail. And so if you go into a supermarket today, you're seeing we're having a real hard time keeping the shelves full. And I think we probably have another 3-4 probably bad weeks of affected distribution until it stabilizes. Because most people with COVID should get better in 2 weeks and be back to work. But, you know, some people it hits harder, and then it's not just facts, it's also the fear of what might happen. And so we are trying to adapt, and one of the things we've done is add some restaurant suppliers that we never dealt with before, because we know they don't have a place to sell their merchandise. And we're also, I guess our biggest challenge is trying to manage the risk of spread. And so we've instituted really difficult things to make sure our customers, employees, and vendors don't spread, you know, COVID to each other. And so if you go to one of my stores today, 100% of my employees are in masks. You'll see we put up protective shields, plexiglass shields. In most places, you have a prolonged conversation with a customer, like the cashier, customer service, pharmacy. You'll see that we're much more prescriptive on how you have to shop a store. We have one-way aisles. We have markings on the floor for 6-foot distancing. And we're metering admittance into the store, which is really painful because, you know, prior to this, you go to any retail food store anytime you want, and you go in and, yeah, maybe there's a line at the checkout, but it's not difficult to get what you want. And now we have to limit the occupancy very, very dramatically. So our target occupancy is 30% of what our legal maximum is. And sometimes it has to go down lower than 30% because we don't want customers backed up on the front end where they may be too close to each other. Yeah. And so that's some very difficult changes for us and for our customers, our employees. And we are starting next week taking temperatures of our employees and vendors.
Oh, wow.
So we won't be permitting anyone with 100-degree temperature or more to enter the building, which we never had to deal with anything like that before. And as far as COVID cases, we're totally into keeping an eye out on that. And we have bumped up our employees' pay $2 an hour to work during this crisis. And we've also added PTO if you get COVID, incremental to your other PTO. So we'll cover your time out while you're sick for 2 weeks before your other PTO comes in. So employees are very free to tell us they're not feeling well. And when they tell us that, we have them self-quarantine, we have them check for COVID. And we also are very sensitive to who they work with. So we have had some COVID cases, and it's not just quarantining them, but everyone they work with, we're quarantining. And so, yeah, I think it's the safest way to go to prevent spread.
And
most people get better pretty quickly, and then they can come back to work. But if you let everyone get sick, then it'll be a disaster. So I think we're doing the right thing there. Yeah. So as you can see, we have a lot going on, and it has become. We're thankful we're open and can serve people, but it's been very challenging.
Yeah, and I mean, these are really incredible policies that you guys have put in place to protect both people who are patronizing the store and also your workers. And are you working with other major retailers to come up with sort of consistent standards, or is there conversation about that sort of more broadly in the retail community?
So I can't say we're working together, but the truth of the matter is we are kind of following good examples. Mm-hmm. And so someone somewhere in the country or world will address something a certain way, and we'll call them up and ask them how it's working. And then a lot of us are copying the good ideas. So one of us put up the shields, then everyone followed, or most people followed. And we also have colleagues in China and Italy and other European countries or Asian countries. The grocers there are months ahead of us. Wow. So they've been through things that we're just experiencing now. And as the crisis started, we have gotten feedback from them of what they've experienced and what worked, what didn't work. And so a lot of these ideas were experimented with many months ago in China or in Italy.
Yeah. I want to jump back to one of the points that you made earlier about sort of managing this crunch of supply. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys are handling sort of the changing supply chain that's happening and meeting, what people need to be buying right now?
So our industry that works on a very low margin has become very lean and efficient and computerized. And so one of our typical stores will carry 60, 70,000 items. And we have a perpetual inventory on every item. And actually, we have computer algorithms that figure out how much more we need based on the whole supply chain. And none of that works right now because the supply chain is not reliable the way it used to be. Yeah. And so it's back to the old-fashioned managers scrambling around and calling people they know in the industry and saying, do you have any more chickens? Do you have any more toilet paper? Do you have it, And we've expanded maybe as many as 100 new relationships to just try to have some product for our customers. And sometimes many states away, because Maryland's not quite as bad. So we found some distributors in Maryland that could support us. And a lot of times the items are not what customers are used to. So we bought a lot of restaurant supply toilet paper because our toilet paper is not available. And, of course, it's not the beautiful Charmin multi-pack that you're used to, but I don't want to leave people without any toilet paper. So we've been scrambling.
Yeah. And Jeff, I want to shift quickly. I know you're sort of known both here in Philadelphia and nationally for inclusive hiring practices and serving communities that are traditionally underserved. Can you talk a little bit about how you think the pandemic is sort of affecting workforce equity issues and issues facing some of these communities?
Well, one interesting thing, a lot of our workers, have a newfound respect from the world because they know they could get sick. Everyone else is at home. And they know coming to work, even though we did all these things to mitigate the risk, they know they could get sick coming from work, and they're there anyway, serving customers and trying to take care of them. And so a lot of our customers are just very grateful and thankful, and they've expressed the appreciation for them being there to serve them. And our team feels very good about that because in the world, they don't always get a lot of respect, and they appreciate that. On the other hand, we had some very upset customers that things have changed and are kind of taking it out on our workers. And of course, we don't control any of this. We're just trying to pivot and take care of people's families the best we can.
Yeah.
The second thing is, I would guess that more people that are working are going to get sick than people that aren't working. And the truth of the matter is, our workforce is more diverse. And we are open. We have, returning citizens and in very large numbers. And so they are more exposed, but they are doing well financially. So we're paying them more money. They're working more hours, and while other people are suffering, they're doing well financially. So it's sort of a mixed bag. They're doing well money-wise, but they know they're taking a risk. Some people are being real about managing that, following all the rules and doing what they should be. Other people are panicked and asking not to come to work because they're just panicked about the risks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kim, I think we want to now pivot over to, let's talk about the small business owners and how they are sort of coping with this crisis.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Economy League. I think this is an important discussion since this crisis is affecting so many people in the food economy. But for small businesses, what I'm noticing is sort of two scenarios. And the first scenario is the small business, the small food business, who really didn't have any cash reserves, who solely relied on foot traffic. They are scrambling. They're scrambling to keep their doors open. They either had to reduce hours of their workforce, or either had to just let people go completely. And they're scrambling to apply for different resources, whether it be a loan or a grant, or something to stay afloat. So that's one side of the coin. But then the other side of the coin for the small businesses, and I think it's more on that first side of the coin, that's really scrambling to stay afloat. And unfortunately, their doors may not never reopen. But the other side of the coin is a small business who was just able to pivot. Like Maria said, that's a buzzword, but it's true, who was able to pivot. And those small businesses are the ones who were able to transition to a curbside delivery model, quick and easy, was able to maybe add an additional service line, maybe sell things they didn't normally sell that were food related, like milk and bread and cheese and things of that sort out of their center. They had cash reserves, and they were able just to adjust to the changing times. So those are the two scenarios, for the small businesses. So it's, it's ones that are scrambling, but it's a few that were able to pivot and they had cash reserves so they can stay afloat in the interim. And particularly, I guess, meal service companies. So let me give you just a real example. Our storefront restaurant, which is 48th Street Grill, his revenue dropped 40% as of like March the 12th. But our meal delivery company that works at our culinary center, revenue increased 40%. So that's just what's happening, with small businesses.
Mm-hmm. And are there policies that you can think of that are coming to mind that really could sort of help ease the burden for some of these small businesses that are struggling? Well,
the policies that the federal government has instituted, the intent of the policies is really good. But the issue is access and streamlining to access the policies. That's where people are struggling at. So the small business loans, the disaster relief loans, those could be really, really good. And they have, I think, a tax credit program that could be really good for some businesses. But people struggle on, I guess, access to those loans and just completing the application. So I think more policy. I think the federal government probably needs to do another round of funding. I think that's going to be needed. It may not be needed, you know, they may not see it now, but it's definitely going to be needed. They're going to have to think of another creative tax credit program that could be very helpful. I think they're going to have to, you know, make sure that people can get access and know how to understand how to use, like, you know, like different tax credit programs and streamlining applications. So I think I think their intent on the policies are good, and I think they do have some good policies in place. There could be more, but as of right now, I think people are struggling with accessing and understanding how the policies can affect their business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, one of the things that we sort of try to do at the Economy League is put this lens of equity on it. Are you seeing differences in equitable access? So whether it's minority-owned businesses or you know, small businesses in general, can you talk a little bit about equity and access to small business loans like this that you're seeing?
Absolutely. So for the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, for example, that's being instituted by local banks. So the businesses who had relationships with banks were more successful in getting those applications through the program. The ones who didn't have relationships, which are normally like the small minority company who really don't have banking relationships or haven't had the opportunity to establish banking relationships, those are the ones that's going to the bottom of the pile. So yeah, so there is, you know, there is issues where people are struggling just because they just don't have those existing banking relationships. They may not have access to internet. And if they do have access to internet, they may not have access to have understanding on how to just complete documents online, how to upload documents, or they may not have kept their documents all in order for the documents they need to process the loan. So yes, we are seeing a lot of inequities in the small business community, especially in the minority small business community.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you have such this interesting perspective, you know, we want to make sure that this education gap that you're pointing to really gets closed. So we'll make sure to share some of the resources that you mentioned with folks to help make sure that people are connecting to the resources that they need.
Yeah, sure. And we're at the Enterprise Center, we're doing virtual office hours via Zoom to help small businesses just navigate these rough times. So if you visit our website, you can sign up, you know, to participate in the virtual office hours. And we are helping you know, the people who contact us navigate the whole application process as much as we can. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So I think we want to pivot now to some questions just broadly to the panel in general. You know, from each of your perspectives, what advice would you give to your peers as they navigate through this time of uncertainty?
Do you want us to start in any order?
Jeff, why don't you? Jeff, why don't we start with you because you're at the top of my screen.
I think if you think about this, this is not going to be over in 2 weeks or a month. I think it's going to take time for society to return to normal. And I think you're going to see that the consumer's behavior is going to be risk averse from being in large crowds. And I think this will have potentially a year or multi-year impact on how consumers operate. And they probably would lean a little more towards retail and less towards hospitality because of the risk of being for a prolonged period of time with others. So I think from the hospitality standpoint, they should think about how can they create less risk for the consumer It might be, which is a hard business decision, but taking tables out of the restaurant, spreading them further apart. We're also finding ourselves doing things we don't really want to do like that. Basically making things less dense, because less dense is less risk. Also, the manufacturers, about half the stuff they make is for hospitality and half is for retail. If there is going to be a multi-year shift, they're not set up to handle it, and they have moved very slowly to move production more towards retail. So I think manufacturers should look at that. And I think the one risk I'm concerned about, I think that the retail is going to have difficulty maintaining its variety, because I see a lot of manufacturers going to pruning items and basically producing as much quantity as they can of lesser amount of items. And I think we're going to go through a period of a year of really having a reduction in the variety that we're accustomed to. And I think it's going to take some getting used to. And there's going to be winners and losers in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks so much for that perspective. Maria, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think Jeff has a point on the push towards retail. Like the sense of fear is really the challenge as well. Once they reopen everything and the economy is allowed to execute certain things, I mean, what's a bar going to look like as far as getting a drink? Or, you know, are tables going to need to be pushed at a farther distance rather than trying to get the profit per square foot that they need in order to turn over a certain number of tables to make money? I think that the brick and mortar places are going to have a little bit more challenge for how they can keep their costs down and find a model that makes them profitable. I think e-commerce, more people are doing a lot with their programs, integrating more digital capacities, where like Jeff was mentioning about the technology, our industry has always been very slow, especially in the small business sector, to adopt that kind of like data awareness and like efficiencies using technology to move forward. Curbside was something that in the past was not really used, even though franchises were really pushing that kind of style of service. I think you're going to see more of that in the future as an opportunity, because people are cooking more at home than they ever were before. So I know that some takeout places were informing us that like their sales have gone down, you know, because more people are just scared to get food from takeout. But then you have places like Hungry, for example, that has chefs that are taking catering aspects and just making takeout to take to your home, and you can have a high-end chef, you know, serve you food and then deliver, drop off contactless. So I think the delivery services are going to change long term. I do think it's going to be a year, you know, a year out, and everyone's going to have to try to switch gears to this is the time to try new things and to, you know, model after each other, use support systems from one another, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, because, you know, with the tide coming in, we got to raise all boats so that it lifts us all up together and rebuild the local communities in our economy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kim, do you have any thoughts for your peers?
Yeah, I do. A few. So I echo what Maria and Jeff said. I think, you know, restaurants are going to have to think about just a new redesign of what that's going to look like. And that's probably going to be some component, like Maria said, the curbside is going to be, you know, just part of their initial offerings right there. In addition to, they're probably going to have a retail component inside. I don't think no longer you're going to go into a restaurant and it's just going to be like a hostess table with a bunch of, you know, tables and a bunch of waiters. They're going to actually have to probably like sell, you know, just retail components inside as part of their offerings going forward. I also think that restaurants are going to have to put sanitation and sterilization like as part of their marketing. Like people want to go to a restaurant knowing that a restaurant is practicing, you know, really safe sanitation and sterilization processes. And unfortunately, that's going to be part of your marketing tool if you want to survive. That's going to make people feel safe and reassured that it's okay to come into, you know, to come into your establishment. Yeah. So yeah, that's my advice. It's going to be a new normal for everyone, and everyone is going to have to adjust.
Yeah.
I think your last point's a good point. We first started power washing our carts, and our customers told us it's not enough. And now in our stores, we actually have someone sanitizing the handle before you use the cart on every single cart. That is the standard of sanitation we never imagined we had to deal with before.
And the cost associated with that.
It's huge. The cost is huge.
Yeah, yeah. But people are going to, I guess, migrate to the restaurants that, you know, have, you know, like hostesses and waiters and people in the kitchen with masks on and gloves on. And they're going to be nice, and they're going to be white, and they're going to be, you know, it's going to look nice, but that's where people are going to go initially.
Yeah, when this crisis is over, I don't know if the masks are going away so quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep.
So with the remaining time, I think we should start moving into the Q&A with our participants out there. So I want to just remind our audience that rather than the chat function, please put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can in this time. Mahona and I are going to be scanning through them, and we'll pose them to our panel and to ourselves if there's any questions for us. So we had a few before, some eager participants who emailed us a few days before with some questions as well. So one question I want to bring up first is, do we see in a post-pandemic, you know, some of this has brought up the idea of social distancing and keeping people apart. Are we going to see a rise in automation in terms of hospitality workers and in food retail? Do you think that's going to be, there's going to be more of a push for that post-COVID?
I think so. What I'm already seeing is my customers have aggressively moved more to self-checkout, where they were worried about the workers losing the work before. Now they're worried about being next to another human being. And we're at overcapacity on online. And people that no human interaction whatsoever, you know, contactless. And so I do think that has accelerated that movement maybe as much as 5 years faster than it was going. And I do think you will see more and more innovations and automations that involve humans not dealing with each other.
Yeah.
Maria, Kim, what do you think of that in terms of a workforce standpoint or an equity standpoint?
Well, for the workforce standpoint, I mean, so first of all, I do agree with Jeff. I think the industry is going to move more and more to that. But for a workforce standpoint, I mean, you know, it's going to, some people are just going to, you know, going to lose jobs and, you know, lose jobs. So I guess for those folks, if we can have some sort of, you know, like workforce development or retraining programs in place, I think that would, you know, make it much easier to bear.
Right.
Yeah, I think that the technology accelerators were already being adopted by the bigger companies. I think the smaller companies are going to look at their efficiencies and how they could do it. I'm concerned because, you know, I know what Kim's talking about, like people are going to lose their jobs. There wasn't a lot of stability as far as, oh, I can just have one job and I could secure my pay by working in the restaurant industry. Although we were the most hireable workforce, I do think that that statement's going to change because I think that the model of how people are paid and being taken care of, the packages and loyalty need to be designed like much other bigger entities, and they need to look at their payment packages. You're going to see less people, but they need to restructure long term. Like, you don't want high turnover and people just saying like, oh, well, now I have computers and I have some people here. We need to focus on how are we going to develop a retention tool, especially in the restaurant sector to keep the people that we do have. If we're going to slim down, how are we going to support them to make this a viable, long-term, sustainable career rather than something I just flex into because I'm earning a degree right now and I need a little extra money? Or I hope that that system of flex work in a freelance and gig economy may change for the restaurant industry long term.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that brings up some really important equity issues. Absolutely. So kind of piggybacking on that, I know those equity issues are also being faced by many small businesses. We have a question from the audience, from Palmer in the audience, that most small businesses are underbanked, as well as many Philadelphians in general. Are there support mechanisms that are going to be tailored to help these groups, especially immigrant and minority business owners? So maybe Kim, this is sort of best positioned for you.
Yeah, so so that's a very true statement. Most small businesses in the minority community are underbanked, and the programs that's out here now are sort of requiring you to have some sort of banking relationship. So I really don't have an answer to that. My only answer would be is that going forward, you're going to have to start a relationship with a banker, even if it's a small community bank. It doesn't have to be one of the big major banks, but you're going to have to, like people in our community, still go to check cashing places and stuff like that. So all that's going to have to change. You're going to have to really get your, your business established with a bank. And establish relationships so that you can have a place to go to, when this type of situation happens. But it's very unfortunate, and it's a true statement. And I don't have a magic pill that, to fix that right now.
And I wanted to say that I serve a lot of the people that you're talking about, the unbanked and underprivileged people. And in our stores, we've incorporated a lot of solutions for them. Some of our stores have American Heritage Federal Credit Unions, which allow you to have an account without a balance and have very friendly policies to the unbanked. And we also have financial services, bill pay and money orders and things of that nature to allow people to function. And so I think it's important to offer those kind of services so you could serve everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's been great to see some of the banks changing their policies to mention about the friendliness of it, that people can look back to say, how are we able to offer financing to smaller entities in these communities that are vulnerable? I met an organization even through the Economy League that they did character-based loans and kind of changed like how, to Kim's point, like they don't have all their data set in a row. Like maybe there's an educational program, and I know some organizations do, where they're teaching them how to get better at it. At the same time, at the end of the road, once you do this process, you have availability to financing to support your business in the way that others are able to do more easily.
So there was a question out there about supply chain, specifically for produce. So they noticed that that produce is being more stocked than fairly more robust as opposed to meats. Jeff, I think that's a question for you.
What's interesting is, although we use our very large warehouses for produce procurement, but we've always had local suppliers too. There's a lot of local produce suppliers. And so when the big warehouses fail us, we have a lot of opportunities to buy local produce and to buy from local smaller distributors. That's not quite as true in other areas. There are some local meat, but when you go and local fish, but when you go into groceries, there's no local supply. And so the observation is right, and we do have better conditions in produce because of it.
So there was another question out there. One thing that this pandemic has shown is that food workers have an extremely valuable role in our economy and in our communities. Do you think that the industry will see more worker-centered employment practices being implemented in the future as a result, whether that's higher wages, more sick leave, PTO, et cetera?
Well, right now there's been temporary adjustments, but I think there is a sort of national movement to take up the bottom level wages. And I know it's a little frustrating because our business is unionized and our workers earn benefits and retirement and all these things. A lot of our competitors, they don't. They work forever, never getting health insurance, never getting retirement. And so I think there is going to be more pressure on taking up standards. I think we'll have a Democratic president, hopefully, the next time around, and I think there will be an effort to raise the minimum wage and to increase the standards for the people that earn the least.
Maria and Kim, I know that you're kind of in this world as well. Do you think there's going to be more push towards worker-centered employment practices here?
Oh, absolutely. I know it's something Cooks Who Care has been pushing since the beginning. Like, get your employees insurance. 90% of them don't even have this option in their corner, and we need to support our workers a lot better for the long term and stop treating it like a part-time job that someone takes just for something to do. Our support systems are not formalized, they're done independently. And I was meeting with operators individually to say, hey, listen, I found a way that would not cost you anything. And in fact, it could come directly out of an individual's paycheck, and just talk. I think now a new conversation will happen in a broader context, just because we've seen millions of people just set on unemployment, or, just seeing how the economy is reacting right now. There's going to be a change in a new conversation.
Yeah. And I agree as well. And I'm happy to see like a lot of the workers are receiving increases of salary from different organizations. And I mean, that's a good sign. But we all want to push for them to all have more of a higher wage, so they can be able to support themselves and their family, as a career as opposed to a part-time job. So.
Sounds good. Jeff, I want to kick it over to you. Jeff Hornstein.
Thanks, everyone. This has been a really rich discussion. I wanted to thank Jeff Brown, Kim Carter, Maria Campbell. You brought some really interesting perspective to the playing field here today, and the questions were amazing. Sorry, of course, we couldn't get to all of them. My good friend Tom Ginsberg asked a question that I want to kind of float out there, because we at the Economy League are, there's sort of 4 phases to this situation as far as we see things. There's an immediate response phase, and I think we mostly focused on that, but we also sort of turned our eye towards the final 3 R's, which are recovery, reform, and then resilience. And there were a couple of questions about resilience and what are we going to do after this crisis to make sure that we are ensuring that all of our small businesses, but particularly our food small businesses, are more resilient. Right? What are we going to do? The Enterprise Center is well positioned and has been doing this for years, making sure people have tight business models, right? And you all talked about that. I think Maria talked about density per square foot. All right, we have business models that are based on pre-pandemic notions, and is this going to change our whole perspective? So there's some amazing pivots that we heard about, pivots toward technology, e-commerce. We at the Economy League are going to be focused on sort of collecting all the data we can, and that's been one of our challenges, as Mike Shields will tell you in great detail. We don't have good data about our small business sector. Mahona worked really hard to put together good data about the food economy, but we need to work our way up to all levels of government where the big data collections happen, and get them to do a little bit better job, so that the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. There are lots of things we cannot adequately measure. And that kind of points me to the main point that I want to leave everyone with. So we have a huge equity opportunity here, right? The small business community is, as we put out in our data brief this week, is kind of the key to our economy. 99% of businesses are small businesses with under 500 employees. In Philadelphia, as you saw on Mahona's slide, much higher density of small businesses than big businesses, $31 billion in annual payroll in the city of Philadelphia, a huge proportion of our wage tax revenue and business tax revenue. So how are we going to make sure that the small business community, particularly the small business community and communities of color that have been historically marginalized and underserved, how are we going to make sure that banks are taking those folks seriously? And the stuff Jeff Brown's been doing with individuals is amazing, right? Putting credit unions in his stores, meeting people where they are. But how are we going to get the banks in particular to reach out, to do more outreach to small businesses, to make sure that they are getting plugged into the formal financial sector so that they have a shot at these PPP loans? That we published an op-ed in the Business Journal yesterday that asked this question, right? What are the banks doing to make sure that folks are getting access to capital? And I know Kim's boss and my good friend Della Clark has been really banging this drum for a while, and hopefully we will not waste this crisis. So to quote Rahm Emanuel, this is a crisis, let's turn it into an opportunity for transformation. I mean, so many amazing thoughts out here today about how we mitigate supply chain risk. I'll give a plug for our Philadelphia Anchorage for Growth and Equity initiative. We're trying to localize institutional supply chains, right? Part of that is about creating opportunity for local and diverse firms, but it's also about mitigating supply chain risk. So there's a whole bunch of things that were brought up here. You've given us some great ideas about further research that needs to be done, further data that needs to be collected, more stuff that we need to know. And I would say we don't really know enough. And one other piece on the equity side that I just want to bring up is that, as Jeff and other more progressive supermarket owners have shown, supermarkets have been a great entry level and second chance job opportunity, right? So what's going to happen as we move towards more automation, as we move towards mitigating risk and cutting down on unemployment? So those are all the things I just want to leave out there. We're going to be working on a lot of these questions. I just wanted to thank everybody for participating. We had about 75, 80 people at our height here, which is quite good for our first foray into this. Thank you all for being quite respectful with your questions and on the chat. And check out economyleague.org/food economy, where we are going to aggregate all the resources that were mentioned today and to continue this conversation. So with that, I will, Mike and Mahona, are we ready to bid everyone adieu?
Absolutely. We'd like to thank you all again for joining us today. And we hope that you look into the Economy League for some of our data that we're doing and the projects that we're doing. We really are trying to pivot, which seems to be the word of the day, or the word of these past month, really into this to talk about what we can do to not only navigate the city through the COVID crisis, but really post-COVID as well. What can we learn from all this, as Jeff said?
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, Kim. Have a great day. And
thanks for having us.
Stay safe. Stay sane.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.